This evening we're going to have to forego the paranormal contest because I couldn't seem to find the last answer to the contest that we had, but I do know we had a winner, so we're going to have to postpone that for this week. This has been a very odd time for me and my dad. We just got back from Europe last night, approximately almost 24 hours ago, and I'm running on about 2 hours sleep, but you don't want to hear about me. So let's talk about our guest. We have Bill Birnes on with us this evening, and he's a man that needs a little introduction, but for those of you who don't know, he is well known in the TV world and the UFO world because he's the publisher of the UFO magazine. He's a TV producer for such shows as UFO Hunters and Ancient Aliens, and he's also a great friend of ours. So, Bill, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Well, thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Your mic's kind of breaking up a little bit.
It is? Okay, how's this?
That sounds much better.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the invitation.
Oh, no problem. No problem. There's always those things that we've never had a chance to talk about, and I figure, well, since my dad is off doing his other side, wearing one of his many hats, and in this era, well, in this point in time, it happens to be his press hat. He can't be with us, so I figured, hey, you know what? Why not? So
good, go for it.
All right, so let's get right down to brass tacks here. So you have a show that you produced, Ancient Aliens. So you believe, not you. Well, obviously you and a lot of other people believe that we've been influenced in our past because it kind of, there's no other reason why one day we went from cave dwellers to, say, agrarian societies and then being lawyers and doctors the next. It just doesn't make much sense. So, how do you feel about aliens or whatever influencing our society in the past?
Well, I mean, one thing is pretty clear, and this is when you talk to engineers, when you talk to construction people who've inspected some of the megalithic monuments that we see in Machu Picchu, the Nazca Lines, places like that, one of the comments they always make is it would take power tools of such enormous intensity, cutting tools and drills and things like that, to have fit these stones together so securely. I mean, to have made square edges and things like that. And these monuments don't evidence the kinds of hand tools. That's the weird part about it. You don't see the hand tools. You don't see the hand tool markings. So their feeling is, and I agree with them, that somehow somebody had to use some very advanced technology. So even if somehow the aliens or somehow these ancient indigenous peoples had power tools, where would they plug them in? Right? I mean,
exactly.
Where's the 120 line in the Nazca line? I mean, it's just not there. So obviously somebody delivered power, somebody delivered tools, somebody moved these things. So just the monuments themselves and the nature of how these things were assembled, and they were assembled 6, 7, and 8,000 years ago, bespeak some alternative source of power and energy for that to work. So that's how I begin, and say, fine, show me how they built these things. Explain where the power tools came from. Explain how they lifted these stones up the sheer face of cliffs. I mean, if you could explain that, fine. I'd love to hear a conventional explanation for this, okay?
Oh, yeah.
So that's one, right? Then the other is, what are these strange symbols of helicopters,
planes,
and space, people in spacesuits and airplanes and doing in the hieroglyphs? How did these individuals who were painting and in some cases chiseling these hieroglyphs, how did they know what a helicopter looked like? I mean, it just boggles the mind. It makes absolutely no sense. So my point is, come up with a conventional explanation for this, and I'm more than happy to indulge in it.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember I watched, actually I think it was Ancient Aliens that I was watching, and someone made the example of, I think it was the monolith of King Ramses II, and how it had like his laws written out, and they tried to replicate it with hand, and they couldn't do it because the marks were just so precise that a machine had to do it to be able to precisely replicate it. And it just doesn't seem to make much sense. But that sort of leads into the next thing. After this research that was just done on the human genes, and it found all these missing genes that we thought were useless, but now they have some sort of use, do you think that perhaps we've been engineered?
Well, let's say that 100,000 years ago, human beings are the only mammals whose brains are completely asymmetrical. And by an asymmetrical brain, what I mean is that the two hemispheres of the human brain have different functions, different functionality. One hemisphere controls which side. Each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body, and then there's a dominant hemisphere and there is a subordinate hemisphere. Well, the dominant hemisphere in a right-handed person is the left hemisphere of the brain, and that, of course, controls handedness, dexterity, things like that, whereas in a truly left-handed person, not the guy in the King's Speech, in a truly left-handed person, then the brain is reversed. But it's more than just handedness. It's this asymmetric nature of the brain allows human beings to speak because the language center, and the language center is hardwired. This is not a situation where language. The idea of having a language is learned. Language itself, the capacity for human language is hardwired, right? So that you take the same baby, same infant, and if that infant grows up in a Chinese household with parents who speak Chinese, he'll speak Chinese. The exact same infant, let him grow up in Paris, she'll wind up speaking French. The point that I'm trying to make is that the capacity for language is inborn, and the capacity for language actually resides in a specific part of the brain for a right-handed person on the left hemisphere. So how do the two hemispheres talk to each other? How do messages from the dominant part of the brain get to the subordinate part of the brain? Well, that happens through a very thick bundle of neurons called the corpus callosum. And the thing about the corpus callosum that's so fascinating is that if the corpus callosum, for one reason, is severed chemically, so it's anesthetized and the messages are passing back and forth, interfered with electrodes, so the electromagnetism of the brain doesn't work between the two hemispheres, or physically section, and there have been operations that have severed the corpus callosum, then the two parts of the brain operate completely independently. So the left hand will do something that the brain can't control. The right hand's going to have to control it. Something. We don't know what it is. 100,000 years ago began the process of coming up with basically a bicameral brain where one side was dominant and the other side was subordinate. And that very that physiological change in the human brain anatomy meant that human beings could develop the use of tools, develop handedness, favoring right hand or left hand, develop language, but beyond language, developed what a linguist call predicative thought, which means one thought is held in place by another. And predicative thought, it's so fascinating, it is analogous to the use of tools. One hand holds a tool and works the tool. In predicative thought, one part of the brain controls the other part, like a tool going into someone's hand. So all of this started happening 100,000 years ago. And the question is, what started it? Didn't happen with chimpanzees, didn't happen with gorillas, didn't happen with orangutans, only happened with human beings. So one theory, one ancient alien UFO theory, is very simple. That was what was manipulated. If there were, assuming for argument's sake, there were aliens that visited planet Earth maybe a million years ago, maybe 500,000 years ago, whenever they visited Earth, when they wanted to manipulate a species of hominid and create a species that would gradually evolve into a species they could control. I mean, these people are not deities, they're not gods, but they are just other creatures, probably a lot like us, very much like us, and what they were able to do was manipulate the human genome such that over the course of X number of generations, thousands of years, human beings then evolved into creatures with this asymmetric brain, which they knew, because of their own evolution, I'm sure, which they knew would eventually allow us to create language. And from language, you get a social structure. From language, you get logic. You get family, clans, territory, states, nation-states. You develop hierarchy, because language is hierarchical. If you examine the nature of language, it's all hierarchical. So that's what was created in the human species. Now, was that created on its own? Or was that created through some form of intelligent design? And intelligent design doesn't mean that we are creationists. Intelligent design means there was some kind of intelligent overseer behind the development of the human species. And so it could well be that there were ancient alien cultures that visited planet Earth, and they needed workers. They needed somebody to mine gold, because gold is such a great conductor. And they found a very compliant hominid species, and literally they began to manipulate that species genetically until they were able to get this thing, our species, to evolve on its own. So I think that's a plausible explanation if you don't discount the fact that there were ancient space travelers millions of years ago.
Well, it's really interesting that you bring that up, because in a lot of the most ancient texts, let's say the Bible or something like that, if you read it in ancient Hebrew, my dad brings this point up all the time, and it's fascinating how it seems like there's also the tale of Gilgamesh as well, and all that stuff, like by the ancient Sumerians and things like that, but it sounds like there literally were people that came down from the sky, took saliva and tissue samples and things like that, and messed with, it sounds like, with their genes and stuff. But the thing that makes it more interesting is that they used it for slave labor. And now that they're done, if this did happen and they're done, then what do we do? But that's why I don't...
Well,
oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. But, I lost my train of thought. No, now let's see. I was going on about...
No, you were saying that they developed the human species for slave labor, now they've left, or now we've evolved, now what happens?
Oh, yes, now I remember. Yeah, so it seems as if you take away the shiny glitz of the cities and things like that, we're still really a hunter-gatherer society, and we really haven't evolved that much, if you really think about it. If anything, we may be devolving from the way everything's going nowadays. So how do you feel about that?
Well, I have a different theory. On the one hand, I'm wondering if by feeding the human race, what your father says about the Nephilim, those that fell down from the heavens, and if you read Genesis, one of the first things you read after the story of Cain and Abel, what you then read is how the children of Adam and Eve mated with the children of the Nephilim. So almost immediately, three events take place, okay? The three events are, well, actually four. One is the creation of human beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
By an otherworldly force. Call that otherworldly force whatever you want to. obviously, the Bible says that the otherworldly forces are creator. It's the Lord, okay? So an otherworldly force, a divine force, omnipotent force, an almighty force created human beings, okay? Almighty with respect to human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next event, the very next event that happened, is that there is another strange creature that this new human race encountered. That other strange creature is a reptile. But it's a reptile that's a sentient reptile, a reptile that can have a conversation, a reptile that can seduce and wean away the created human from its creator. And that's obviously the serpent in the garden, okay? But it's clearly a serpent that is not crawling on its belly, because the punishment that the one otherworldly entity imposes on the otherworldly entity in the garden is, you shall crawl on your belly and mankind shall crush you with its heel. That's the punishment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and there'll be enmity between you and the human being. So immediately, I can look down at my brook where I'm sitting at, and if I see a snake, I hate the snake. So, immediately that is somehow lodged into our collective unconscious, that we hate snakes. So that's the second otherworldly encounter,
mm-hmm.
right? The first otherworldly encounter creates human beings. The second is the serpent. The third otherworldly encounter is the presence of the Nephilim, those who fell from the heavens, yet another non-human entity. And then the fourth encounter is that they intermarry, they interbreed. So there's hybridization of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So those four things happen literally within the first few books of Genesis. Then you come to the book of Noah, where the Creator literally repents of his creation, right?
Yeah.
Oh, human beings are impure. So the Creator chooses the one pure human being, Noah, right? Because theoretically Noah has no Nephilim blood in him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Noah who will be the restart for the human race. Everything else will be wiped out in the flood, and we know the flood is a real historical event because it turns up in other cultures. And then Noah restarts the human race, and the Creator is so saddened by what he's done, looking at the remains of life on planet Earth, that the Creator actually enters into a covenant with Noah, and the bow is the symbol of that covenant. So it's fascinating how, if you look at Genesis from the point of view, from the perspective of otherworldly beings and otherworldly encounters,
mm-hmm.
what you literally have is almost a textbook, depending upon the prism you're using, a textbook for ancient aliens.
Oh yeah, I can totally see that. There's a lot of interesting things that you see, and not even just in the Bible. Like if you look at the Mahabharata and things like that, like there are so many interesting examples. But you mentioned something. You mentioned reptilians, and as you know, my dad and I recently just got back from the UK, and we visited Rendlesham Forest with Larry Warren and a bunch of other people who lived around in the area, and it was really, really a very odd place. Have you ever been there?
We filmed there. That was,
oh yeah, that's right.
I think episode 5 or 6 in the first season of UFO Hunters. Sure, we've been there.
Oh yeah, it's a really weird place. But we were with these two women, and one of them, her name's Brenda, and they call her Brendlesham because she's just so fascinated with the place. She has like tons of pictures and things like that. And I was looking at some of them, and she had like pictures of reptilians, different types of craft, even something that they call the octopus man that they saw in a field, and. So I was going to ask you, like, I was thinking of this because I'm jumping ahead to today, of course. Do you think that we're still being influenced today? I mean, I tend to think that the whole Rendlesham thing was some sort of big experiment, but that's just me thinking that. So do you think we're still part of this big whole being influenced by outside forces?
Well, I think one of the elements to a lot of the UFO encounters in modern ufology that we're seeing is that because these encounters tend to take place. I mean, the encounters, there really is an interaction between the military. They tend to take place in the context of nuclear sites. Rendlesham was, even though Chuck Holt couldn't say this because he's still under restrictions from the National Security Act, Rendlesham was a nuclear storage base. There were nuclear weapons at Rendlesham. And one of the things that Colonel Holt said was that the sentry in the guard tower, people tend to think, oh, the United States Air Force personnel, they're a bunch of nuts. They were just running around crazy at the forest. It was right after Christmas. Who knows what they were drinking? These guys don't know anything. They mistook the Orford Nest Light for a spaceship. How dumb are they? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the sentry in the guard tower, and this is the guard tower because we were up there. We actually saw the extent, the range of view. That sentry could see the entire base. And the fascinating thing about it was that sentry, who to this day will not go public, has said not only did he see lights in the sky, and he saw the Air Force security detail in the forest, in Rendlesham Forest, but he actually saw what he said was a light that was shining a beam down directly on the nuclear storage bunker. So it was scanning the nuclear weapons. Now, we don't know, because nobody's ever told us, whether it deactivated the nuclear facilities, whether it very quickly half-lifed the uranium so these things wouldn't explode. Maybe it was assessing the nuclear capability, the firepower of these weapons. Maybe it was simply counting the weapons. We don't know. All we know from the sentry, and we just have the sentry's word for it, is that there was something, a light, hovering over the nuclear storage facilities, scanning them, or at least playing some kind of a beam on these things. And you don't know what that beam is. So, I mean, you compare that to the 1945 events over the Hanford nuclear facility in Washington, where people claim there was a strange object hovering over that, over Oak Ridge in Tennessee, over Roswell Air Force Base in 1947, because that's what happened. I mean, before the actual crash at Roswell, the folks who were the Army personnel who worked on the craft, who were truck drivers, who were the sergeants running the base, they saw at least two craft over the runway. So even then, before the actual crash, there were craft days before over the runway. The point is that ever since 1945, and especially with Foo Fighters as well, ever since 1945, these craft have tended to turn up around nuclear facilities. 1965 Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana. In the 1980s, the Soviet underground nuclear facility. That was another one. They've surveilled our submarines. They were surveilling in 1952 Operation Mainbrace, a NATO exercise that had nuclear weapons. So if you take all of that in context, my suggestion would be that, maybe they are surveilling and are prepared to intervene in the case of the kind of a nuclear exchange that would literally wipe out life on the planet. It's to their interest that planet Earth not be destroyed, not be poisoned by radiation. And I think in part that's what's going on.
Yeah, I suppose that makes sense. I mean, that's one of the best theories I've heard so far. But I wanted to get into a little bit of exopolitics here. So you tend to believe that not all aliens or UFOs or whatever are friendly, because most people that we talk to that talk about exopolitics, they're usually like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that, and it's like all happy and stuff, and it's like, well, what if they don't want to talk, or what if they don't want to do this? And it doesn't really occur to them that these things could be hostile.
Right. I mean, if you consider the possibility that there are many different alien species, and that some of them could care less about human beings, some of them are benevolent because we are their creation, and some of them would love it if human beings simply disappeared from the planet and just left it alone. And some of them might not even be life forms as we understand life forms. I mean, I keep thinking of one invasion that took place. I mean, this is my pet theory, is that one of the invasions that took place, one of the extraterrestrial invasions, was an invasion, I like to call it a silicon invasion, that this craft literally seeded humanity with the very minute piece, but an important piece of technology it needed to start evolving silicon-based life forms, i.e. computers, with the expectation that at some point in the history of the human race, in the history of technology, and it's really only been, 70 years, in the history of human technology, we would become so reliant, and we ourselves would evolve computers to the point where we are relying on them for basic functions of our society.
Oh, yeah.
And as we evolve computers more and more, and I'm sure that you have heard in your experience, you want to do something, and somebody on the other end of the phone says, oh, the computer won't let me do that. The computer won't allow me to do that.
Yep.
You've seen that. I've all heard that. What do you mean the computer won't allow you to do that? What did the computer say, is telling you you're wrong? So here's a computer that, because of its place in the bureaucracy of whatever entity that it's functioning in, its place is that it will not allow a human being to do something, to make a human decision with respect to a choice. And it's the computer that makes the choice for you. Now, now we know that where we're going in evolutionary computing, let's just take battlefield drones, for example.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to have drones that don't just fire on command from some remote base in the middle of Kansas or something. You're going to have drones that actually make the decision to fire based on a knowledge base, based on a set of shoot-no-shoot algorithms, based on what they can identify through their sensors visually. They're going to make that decision, okay? And Ray Kurzweil, the futurist, has written that at some point, because the whole functionality of modern computer-based society is communication, that if computers are able to communicate with themselves, by themselves, and evolve themselves, you're going to have computers coming to decisions on their own. So does that mean that our technological society has to impose on the computers that we create these kind of Asimov's 3 laws of robotics? No robot can harm a human being, no robot can allow a human being to be harmed, and no robot through its inactivity can cause... you could see the parameters of those 3. And is that what we have to do? Do we have to program morals into our computers? What will happen at some point if drones make their own fire, no fire decisions, if computers come to decisions about what is polluting planet Earth, basically it's us, what's creating all the problems? It's human beings. So what's the one way to do this? Well, you gradually, very gradually, you find ways to eliminate the human beings. Are we going to have a big Armageddon? Are we going to destroy the planet? No, it's probably going to be through plague, through evolving diseases, various forms of avian flu, various forms of swine flu, various forms of plague, various forms of the Marburg virus, the Ebola virus, Rett HIV, things like that. I mean, we're seeing this now as viruses almost magically are evolving to generate their own immunity to the antibiotics that we're using. I mean, right now, one of the major problems in the hospitals are super viruses that can withstand all kinds of antibiotics.
Oh, yeah.
Doctors now are reluctant to prescribe antibiotics, except in the most extreme cases, and the reason is not just that people are intolerant of them. But what people do is the symptoms disappear. They stop taking the antibiotic, and then the remaining bacteria develop. It's like you're giving them a flu shot. They develop their own immunity, and then the antibiotic doesn't work. So, I mean, are there other life forms at work? We know there are, that basically are a threat to human beings. And the answer is, of course there are threats to human beings. So it would be so easy to eliminate human beings off planet Earth through a plague, through a virus, things like that, through weather control. I mean, we're in the midst of weather that is very strange. The ice pack is the lowest it's ever been. Now it's growing again because the Arctic summer has passed, but it's growing again. But the point is, it was the lowest it's ever been. The ocean levels are rising. Temperatures are getting warmer. We just went through one of the hottest summers on record. Tornado Alley is worse this year than it's been in the past. I mean, we could go on and on. The way to do this is not to have this phenomenal nuclear war that suddenly wipes everybody out. But that's the one thing, if I were an extraterrestrial, if I were an alien, the one thing I wouldn't want is a big nuclear war, wreck the whole planet for everybody. No, what I would want is to wipe out most of the human race through natural causes, and then you control the human race that remains.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Or you work a deal with a certain kind of elite, the Carlyle Group, the Bilderbergers, the Illuminati, the Dick Cheneys of the world, the Mitt Romneys of the world. You work some kind of a deal with that elite, and you say, look, you help us out, we'll help you out. Here's the deal. We need that 47%. We need that 99% to disappear or to be completely subservient. So you know what? What can you do politically to eliminate these people? And you're seeing it now. Let's get rid of health care. I'm not saying this is like the Republicans are in league with the aliens. What I'm saying is that if I were an extraterrestrial culture that wanted a nice, compliant human race, so I could really be on the planet and, harvest the planet and get rid of all these other people, then what I'd want to do is work with one group, a society, let's just say it's the 1%, and I would get that 1% to do whatever was necessary to get rid of the rest of human beings. You start with continents where you want to use all the minerals. You start with Africa, right? You work with Asia, and you basically find a way to do it. You don't have to do it overnight because human beings took hundreds of thousands of years to evolve from the pre-hominid state.
Yeah.
So you're not going to do it overnight, but you're going to do it really gradually. And that's what I would do. So do I think they're still here? Yes. Do I think they have an agenda? Yes. And I think we are following that agenda probably against our own will.
Bill?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Sorry, you cut out for a second.
I did. Oh, okay.
Oh, no, it's okay.
No, I think... No, my attitude is I think we're following that agenda probably against our own will.
Oh, yeah, that makes tons of sense. Well, on that pleasant note, we're going to take a break. So we'll see.
Okay.
We'll be right back with Behind the Paranormal with just Ben, this evening. So stay with us.
Hi, I'm Greg Bell, the host of When Radio Was.
I'm Mortimer.
Bill.
Is that you under that blindfold?
Bill, with this thing on, I can't see who I am.
No, I imagine not. Can't you see anything at all under that blindfold?
On a clear day, I can see the blindfold.
You can?
Yeah.
When Radio Was, shows from the past for today's imaginations.
When Radio Was airs Monday through Friday, right here on ON 1240 Radio at 11 a.m. and 11 p.m.
So welcome back to Behind the Paranormal. And I'd like to give a little shout-out to Amazon Kindle right about now. So they are selling the tremendous Kindle Fire right about now, and you can get tons of apps and free things. You can get tons of apps and things on there. You can get tons of books. You can get movies and all that. And it's at a pretty low price at this point in time. And hey, Christmas is coming. You should start your Christmas shopping early. And don't forget, you can also sign up for other things on Amazon. They'll give you discounts on that. And hey, it's a pretty good deal. And there's all sorts of books, including my dad's books. So if you decide to get one, it's a perfect gift for a loved one, friend, family member, whatever. It's a gift for anyone. No, so right. So we're back. Well, we've been here at Behind the Paranormal on WOON 1240 AM radio. So, Bill, you pretty much just answered one of my next questions, because I was going to ask, do you think that if that they could be interested in our politics and international relations and conspiracies and things like that, and maybe certain individuals are working with them. But you already sort of answered that. So, do you think?
Well, I mean, yeah.
Oh, continue. Go for it.
No, go ahead, please. No, go ahead and finish the question.
Oh, all right. So, do you think we're being steered towards something bigger?
Yes, I do. I think that on the one hand, look at the history of the past 70 years, ever since Roswell and ever since the end of World War II. What you're looking at are countries who are hostile countries, with nuclear weapons, and we've never had a nuclear war. We just have not had a nuclear war. And the Russians, the Soviets, manifested their intent to impose communism on us. Mm-hmm. We manifested our intent to destroy them. Back and forth, the Chinese. When you look at all the countries with nuclear weapons, and you realize that we've never, ever, after the event after we bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we never again launched a nuclear weapon. Now, you could say because we're a sane species, because it was not our intent to destroy, et cetera, et cetera. Or you could say, you know what? Somehow, at some point in the history of our development, those in power, let's just say Eisenhower at his meeting with the extraterrestrials at Muroc at Edward Air Force Base, or in New Mexico, basically came to an understanding with the extraterrestrials that they will prevent us from self-destruction. They will keep us from destroying ourselves and give us certain kinds of technology. And in exchange for that, in exchange for our being allowed to evolve on this planet without destroying ourselves, because that was our potential, mm-hmm. Basically they can take whatever resources they need. They can recombine their DNA with our DNA, if that's what they want to do. And they will not disclose their presence, and we will not disclose their presence. And that's the kind of a deal that might have worked out, kind of an open skies agreement. And my take is that Eisenhower, who was a very wise man, Eisenhower essentially took that open skies agreement and said, okay, if we can do this with the extraterrestrials, then we could do this between the Soviets and NATO. And so we structured an open skies agreement. Eisenhower structured an open skies agreement with the Soviets, and basically that really kept us from blowing one another up over the course of 60 years. So I think that there were positive benefits from that. I think we might have been on a collision course. I mean, think of all the nutcases we've had. When the Cuban Missile Crisis popped up, then I think, who was it, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Curtis LeMay? I don't know whether he was Chairman of the Joint Chiefs or something, the head of the Air Force.
Yeah,
but,
I think he was.
Curtis LeMay, who basically ran, right, he was George Wallace's vice presidential candidate. Curtis LeMay said, no, this is it. Let's just bomb the crap out of Cuba. Let's invade Cuba. This is our chance. We have the Soviets over a barrel. This is self-defense. Let's go in there and take out Castro. And when we take out Castro, the Soviets will back off. We'll show them who's born. Kennedy didn't want to do that and didn't do that. And we could have been in a nuclear war just over the... I spoke to George Merritt, who was one of the interceptor pilots. This was in the Edwards Air Force episode we did in season 1. Mm-hmm. We spoke to this guy Merritt, and he said, I was among the group, the squadrons, flying over northwestern United States with nuclear weapons, with nuclear missiles under my wingtips. And if we saw a Soviet squadron of bombers, and the Soviets had them, and they had a lot of bombs, and they would have overwhelmed us, our instructions were fire every single missile we had over at the Soviets, over the Bering Strait, wait till they crossed the strait, and go back to base, reload, and go back up again. And he said, but we knew, just from the sheer numbers of Soviet bombers, that some of them were going to get through. This was 1962, that some of them were going to get through, and we knew that cities where our families lived, like San Francisco, were going to be destroyed.
Yeah.
So there we were. We had nuclear-tipped interceptors in the air looking for Soviet bomber squadrons. That's how close it came. And it didn't happen. And it didn't happen not because the Soviets punked out, not because Khrushchev was a coward. He wasn't. When you read the story of Khrushchev and Kennedy in Vienna in 1962, when Khrushchev beat the crap out of Kennedy in that meeting, telling him, right, he said, either you get the hell out of Berlin, we fix Berlin, or we're invading Berlin, we're going to close it down. And Kennedy was actually panic-stricken. He had no answer.
Yep.
So he told Scotty Weston of the New York Times it was the worst day of his life. Khrushchev was brutal with this guy. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that for all of the things that happened, he never did go to nuclear war. Had a lot of small wars, had a lot of flare-ups, India, Pakistan, Israel, and Egypt, and Jordan, and Syria. We had all these minor wars, the 8-year war between Iran and Iraq, but never did anybody go nuke. And there's a reason for that. And I think one of the reasons is that if we try to go nuke, events such as what happened at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where the nukes were shut down, events that happened in the Soviet Union when a whole Russian nuclear facility was shut down. Actually, the missiles armed, the launch codes were input, they were set to go, and the Moscow Center could not abort the launch. And the Soviet Union was about to launch ICBMs, multiple warhead ICBMs against the United States, and that would have triggered a nuclear war for sure, at least a bilateral nuclear war. And that would have, and at the last minute, whatever was interfering with the Soviet control over its own missiles, it released it, and the Russians automatically aborted the launch. Now, when you consider events like this, you then have to realize there is some external force at work. And that's the position that I would take, that literally we have been told in no uncertain terms that your nuclear weapons will not work. We will not let them work. You could beat each other bloody with blunt instruments, but you will not have a nuke. And that's what I believe.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. And, it's an old military tactic to make something sound so crazy that nobody would ever believe it. And I remember, this is like I saw an episode of Futurama once. I couldn't sleep, and I just had Adult Swim on, and they were making fun of like the military in the 40s, and it was like they just captured like a UFO or something, and it was like, all right, scientists check, like military generals check, and then it was like crazy conspiracy guy no one will ever believe check. And I just thought that was funny because it seems so crazy, but yet it makes so much sense. But then
perfect sense. It
makes so much sense because it doesn't make sense how we're making everybody get rid of nukes yet we still have them. It just is, I don't know, there's a lot of weird things going on, and I've seen some pretty weird stuff in my day, and I wouldn't put it past anything to say that that is a very valid theory in my opinion. But let's we have about like a little under 15 minutes left, but I wanted to ask something really quick. So back in the 40s, like right after World War II, and General Patton wanted to invade Russia because he was like, oh, well, they're weak, we should just go right in and destroy the Soviets. And then I think it was President Ike at the time said no. So I guess that sort of makes sense because you need two giant powers to balance each other out, and then that didn't really work because the Soviets decided to...
No, I mean, the story's a little different. First of all, the president at the time was Truman.
Oh, it was Truman. I'm sorry.
And here's what happened. And this still resonates today. what happened after the Soviets, the Red Army invaded Berlin, was that part of, I think it's Patton's Third Army, part of Patton's Third Army were in Berlin. Still, they were occupying Berlin when the Russians invaded, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was the Russians took elements of Patton. This was not in the movie. This is what really happened. The Soviet Army took the American soldiers prisoner. They basically took whole elements of Patton's Third Army and they transported them back to Russia. They were like POWs. And Patton was so incensed at this that he wanted to invade Berlin, reinvade Berlin, invade the Soviet sector of Berlin, and engage the Russians. So he knew the Russians were vulnerable. They just expended themselves on fighting the Nazis. We were strong. But that was the fight that Patton had with Beetle Smith and with Ike. And Truman had to sign off on the fact that American soldiers were taken as POWs by the Russians. And the question is, why would the Russians do that? Why would the Russians take Americans, which they also did in Korea, by the way, and also in Vietnam?
Yeah.
Why would the Russians do that? Why would they do that? What was in it for them? Well, here's what was in it for them. The Soviets had a plan, and the plan was to take the identity of these soldiers, take their identity, and assign their identity to Soviet spies, basically deeply programmed KGB agents.
Oh, yeah. Sleeper
and
agents.
They would be infiltrated back into the United States under those identities. And in time of war, they would be the agent provocateurs who would bomb power plants, break up railroad crossings. It was literally a whole bunch of spies. Now, the CIA knew this. And this is now 1948, okay? So the CIA knew this. This is not a big secret.
Yeah.
We knew that the Russians had taken a lot of our soldiers. So the CIA knew this. So what did the CIA do? Knowing that there were going to be Russian subversives living in the United States with American identity that had programming, and the programming was so deep, these were people who were conditioned to respond to certain triggers. Look at the story of Candy Jones.
Oh, yes.
Along with John Neville. Okay, so these are people who respond to travel. I mean, she was one of our assets. But so what did we do? Well, as early as the early 1950s, we began taking the records from the German concentration camps of the conditioning experiments, the torture experiments, and we began to develop theories about how to break through deep conditioning. And believe it or not, one of the ways we figured out how to do this was not just using drugs, not just using all kinds of, conditioning techniques, but using electrical currents to stimulate certain portions of the brain. And in so doing, you literally would figure out where certain memories were stored. This is in like modern brain biotheory. This is like the rage right now, but this dates back 60 years.
Wow.
And that's what we were doing, but we didn't do it in the United States. We did it in Canada. And what's so ironic is that two of the biggest books of the late 70s, early 80s, maybe late 60s, early 70s, they became movies, they became movements in psychoanalysis. The Games People Play, right, that song by Engel the Humperdinck, The Games People Play,
yeah.
and I'm Okay, You're Okay.
Oh, yeah.
They all developed from that early CIA finance research into stimulating memories in the brain, and that became known as Mind Control Ultra, MK Ultra.
Yeah,
So,
I did a report on MK Ultra in high school.
Well, but that was but the rationale for that was what you mentioned, that elements of Patton's army were taken by the Soviets. We knew what they wanted to do with those identities. We knew they were going to be deeply conditioned. The Russians invented conditioning. I mean, look at Pavlov's dogs.
Yeah.
Pavlov's dogs, they invented this stuff. So given that, the fascinating thing, of course, is that the Soviets invented it. The only way to break through some of that level of conditioning, deep conditioning, was to use electrical stimulation for various parts of the cerebral cortex to bring up certain memories. And that's what we were experimenting with.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. I didn't know Patton's troops getting captured caused all of that.
They did, as did American pilots at the end of World War II.
Oh, yeah.
And remember, at the end of the Korean War. And, of course, remember how the, I'm trying to think of the actual incident. But, it was a motion picture called 36 Hours starring James Garner, where James Garner was captured by Nazi agents in England, and they had set up a prison camp which was supposed to look like an American hospital. And so that when James Garner came out of the sedatives, came out of the anesthesia, he awoke in an American hospital. And there was an American nurse, and everybody spoke with American accents, and James Garner had no memory. And they were convincing James Garner that he had been, they'd rescued him, and he'd been unconscious for weeks, even during the whole Normandy invasion, and to stimulate his memory, to bring back, as he was an amnesiac, to bring back his memory, they asked him to lay out the battle plan for the invasion of Normandy, which he then began to do. Now, the premise of that script was taken from what the Russians and the Chinese were doing at the end of the Korean War. They'd set up POW camps that were made to look like American hospitals, and when the pilots came out of anesthesia, that's the Manchurian Candidate. That's literally the story of the Manchurian Candidate, which was based on truth.
Oh, yeah, the Manchurian Candidate. That's actually one of my favorite movies. But no, it makes tons of sense. But that actually got way off the topic. No, it's So, well, I was actually going to go into Nazis and stuff, but we don't really have that much time left. So, what's going on with you? What are you working on now?
Well, right now I'm in a television series. I'm in actually 2 television series. It's called Unseal the Alien Files and Unseal the Conspiracy Files, and they're both in syndication. So, depending upon where you live, we are on one of the local channels in your area. Here in New York City, it's WPIX. I'm not sure where it is in Boston, but it's WPIX in New York City. It's WPHL in Philadelphia. It's KTLA in Los Angeles. And you can catch us on, I think, Saturday nights, early Sunday mornings, set the DVRs. And there are it's Alien Files, which is about what was the whole issue of the Blue Planet Project, and is it true, is it false, what are we talking about? And the other are the Alien Conspiracy Files. What is the agenda for controlling human beings on planet Earth? So that's what I'm up to right now, and I'm completing, I just finished a book, which we published, finished 2 books, which we published in 2013, actually 3 books that are coming out next year, one of which is, it's called UFO Hunters Book 1, and it is the book tie-in to UFO Hunters Season 1. The other book is not about UFOs. It's about the crisis in our military right now, how why there are so many suicides in the military, what devastation the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have caused for our troops. And then the 3rd book is called, it's the last book in the 3-book series called The Haunting of America. This next book coming out about a year from now. It's called The Haunting of 21st Century America.
Oh, wow. That sounds fascinating. So these are all coming out next year?
All coming out next year. And we're turning in a novel before Halloween, written with George Norrie. It's a time travel novel, and that's coming out next year. And so there's a lot of stuff happening.
Oh, yeah, it definitely sounds like you're really busy. I mean, it takes my dad, my dad's book is 3 years late now. He's nowhere near done. But that's what you get for running your own hours and things like that and having other things on the side. So, well, we don't really have enough time for another question, but, well, Bill, it was great having you on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, anytime. It's always great to hear from you. You always have such interesting things to talk about, and you never run out of things to say.
Okay, well, I hope that when these books come out, I can come back on and talk about them.
Oh, of course, yeah. I'll write that down. So yeah, we will definitely have you back on for then, and we'll probably be in touch anyway.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, so that was definitely a fascinating show. We still have a few minutes left, and I would go into some we can go into some announcements. So, we just did our talk in Rendlesham, the Rendlesham area in Suffolk, England, and got back from that last night, and that was a really, really great, and if anybody is checking out the podcasts or listening live that we met there, just wanted to say thank you for being such a great audience, and it was really great, and it was nice getting to know all of you. You're all wonderful, wonderful people. So, don't forget, we have we're going to be at the Psychic Fair in Warwick, so check the website, www.behindtheparanormal.com, and you'll just check under what's new. And you can see that we're going to have our next scheduled talk then. And it's going to be in October sometime. I don't have the date in front of me, so we'll get back to you with that on Sunday or next Monday, depending on what you listen to. So don't forget, you can always get all our podcasts. They are all free on the show website, www.behindtheparanormal.com. And we have over 400 podcasts, and we have lots of fun shows and things like that, including this one, which I'm doing by myself. And usually I'd have my dad here, and I'd probably make a snide remark or something. Well, snide, no, more of a tongue-in-cheek remark about how, well, I wasn't there for most of the early shows, but it doesn't really matter right now. So, we still have about a minute left. So I'm going to say a few other things about how, well, it was just lovely having Bill Birnes on. We don't get enough chance to talk, and I actually had a hard time trying to get a hold of him because of many different problems and not having internet access for a very long time, and my email is messed up and things like that. But I hope everybody enjoyed the show. I actually forgot to give out the call-in numbers, so I'm very sorry if anyone wanted to call in. And there's only about 30 seconds left, so I can't really ask you to call in now. But I would like to say one last thing before we close up here. I want to say that our quote goes out to, or our quote of the day, so to speak, goes out to Joe Ferrier, and he always would end the show by saying, "Watch the skies," and I feel, or well, sometimes he would end his show that way. So I feel like it's appropriate to say, watch the skies, and thanks for sailing with us, or well, me, on this great cosmic journey. We'll see you next time.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.